Hello and welcome back to the show. Today I'm doing something that I've been looking forward to for a long time but have not had the time to do, and that is a review of White Forest builds in Genesys format. If you are new to my channel, I tend to stay away from combos and spreadsheets because that type of content is everywhere on YouTube and does not give you a fundamental understanding of how the game works. Instead, I will be focusing on deck theory and the fundamental principles of deck building to teach you how Yu-Gi-Oh works. In this video, that means I'll be talking about Genesys format in general to start with. Then I'll talk about some of the constraints that all different archetypes have in Genesys format, and specifically White Forest, for example, how the points cost are spread across the archetype. Thirdly, I will do a review of all of my viewer submissions so far, and then I will choose the one that I think is the best based on the most relevant principles for deck building in Genesys format. Okay. So let's get started. If you've been living under a rock, Genesys format is very straightforward. Firstly, there are no link monsters. Secondly, there are no pendulum monsters. Thirdly, there is no extra monster zone. And fourthly, there is a point cost for some cards. Most cards in the game don't have any point cost, but usually the best or the most generic cards in the game do have point costs. So you can see that Nightmare Throne, for example, has a 50 point cost. And that means that in your standard 100 point cost allowance, you will only be able to play 2 Nightmare Thrones before you expend your entire points cost allowance. Or if you play 1, it means you've used your half of your entire allowance before playing any other cards. What is very important to keep in mind here at the level of choosing your archetype in Genesys format is you are going to find decks that can't be played in principle because you can't play pendulums or link monsters. You're going to find decks that kind of can't be played because some of the basic engine cards that you want to play a lot of are very expensive, and so you're heavily incentivized against playing it, but technically you could if you could find something else that's worth pairing with it, like Ryziel. You're going to find decks like Tearlaments, which are basically effectively costed out of the game because a single Shien is half of your entire point cost allowance. So playing 1 Shien and 1 Rhino Heart, which means not only can you not play any non-engine cards that are costed, but you also can't play any of your actual engine cards, and so this is basically dead in the water. Lunalight happens to be the best example I can think of at the moment of a deck that has squeezed by no point cost allowance at all across the entire archetype while actually still being playable in current modern Yu-Gi-Oh! So decks like Lunalight are in a tremendous position because they get to spend their entire points on all of the non-engine cards they want. They could play Dominus Impulse if they want because they could go all the way up to 90 points with that 3 of. They could play in a more efficient way, trying to spread their points across, better non-engine cards like Ash Blossom, the Charmies, etc., etc. So these types of decks give you a lot more flexibility with the non-engine you want to choose. So Lunalight and decks like that are an excellent place to start. Now, White Forest kind of sits in the middle. There are some very important cards that have very steep costs, like Diabell Queen. So this is a quarter of your entire allowance. So when you think about building this type of deck, you have to be very cautious and understand that when 2 Azamina cards are half or more than half of your entire allowance, you are basically not going to be playing with as good non-engine as many of your opponents will be. So taking this into consideration, let's see what our viewers have come up with, the different approaches they've come to playing this deck, and then I'll tell you what I think the best deck building principles are across those different profiles. Okay, so let's get started with the first one. So this one is kind of unusual. This is an Allure Queen build. And the first thing that I want to say in terms of White Forest is that we are probably going to have to play more engine than we normally would that isn't super typical. So for example, the 3 Stellar is something that has not been popular for a very, very long time. This is something that was played during the toy box format because you could accept, an Imperm, a Veiler, an Ash, etc. on your Stellar because you were sending, for example, a toy soldier and you were going to trigger that effect anyhow. But in modern format, when there are lots of stronger hand traps and it feels like it's very risky to use your normal summon on a Stellar, this card has fallen out of popularity. Many builds have now gone to playing one of them because it is searchable. However, what I think is really going to be the shining star of White Forest in Genesys format is the Diabell's cards. So if we look at the Diabell's the White Witch, you can see most important thing is there are no points on this. There are no points on Diabell Star Vengeance. There are no points on Curse of Diabell. There's no points on Philia Diabell, etc. So these types of cards, which were crucial parts of our end board or of being able to be more resilient through interactions, because if you had hard drawn the Diabell's the White Witch or you'd searched it and your opponent stopped you on your other plays, you could still summon this card and you could go through the Curse of Diabell line, etc. to get the Vengeance on field and then have it be able to not just pop something but also special summon from the extra deck. So this card I think is going to be absolutely critical. I consider this, when this first came out, as the heart and soul of White Forest. And I think that it is even more so the case in Genesys format. So playing 3 of this card, I'm going to say, is probably going to be just very obviously the correct thing to do. And I could also imagine playing, 3 Filia Diabells or maybe even 3 Curse of Diabells could also be extremely standard for White Forest, given the constraints on the rest of our deck. I mean, look at this. You have 20 points on Diabell Star the Black Witch. You can't even play original Sinful Swallow Snake Eye, which is so sad. So this is really, I think, probably going to be the best card in the entire deck. So I hope that this is going to be a theme across all the deck lists, or if it isn't, then I want to see why. But anyhow, in this particular list, we have an Allure Queen build. And so let's take a brief look at the Allure Queens. So basically there are 2 spells here that are important. There is the Allure Dance, which is a continuous spell, which means this stays on field and can be fodder for something else. So this one basically adds an Allure Queen monster or Allure Palace from our deck to our hand. So this searches the 2 ones, so the baby one and then the bigger one. Now these are cards that I showed off before because you could make, like a Light and Dark Chaos Angel pretty easily as your first play to try to push into a board. So that would create a strong sense of pressure. There also was a strong Buster Lock play with this before using a Link monster, which is obviously no longer possible, so you can't do that Buster Lock. Then there's also the Allure Palace, which is a field spell. That means that you will also be able to use this as your spell trap fodder for your White Forest stuff. So this one allows you to pitch a card from your hand to the graveyard as cost, and then you can add to your hand or special summon to your opponent's field an Allure Queen monster from your deck. So having a brief look at this list, I think that the main decision here, if you look at the entire list in its entirety, is playing these Allure monsters, because this is 6, 7, 8 slots dedicated here. And let's see if there's any reasoning provided. So this is an experimental build that tries to use the Allure engine to fix issues that I think Genesys White Forest has, namely normal summon, reliance, and redundant starters. So I guess that kind of makes sense in terms of putting bodies on the board, but I'm curious what this actually is supposed to lead to. So the Allure spells serve as starters and extenders that summon a Stellar/Sylvie from deck without the normal summon. So this one, let me see, I think was it this one? You can send one other spell/trap you control to the graveyard. Special summon as many Allure Queen monsters with different names as possible from your graveyard. So I don't think it's this one. I think it might be this one that says you can send this card equipped with a cards by its own effect to the graveyard. Special summon one spellcaster monster with 1500 or less attack from your hand or deck. So 1500 or less attack. The first thing I think of, where is Sylvie? Yeah, there she is 1500 less attack. So we have the Sylvie here. So I guess that kind of makes sense. That's another way to access the engine. So I guess this that seems acceptable to me as a reason, being able to access your engine more easily, especially when you're not able to play the field spell, or I think maybe Sumless will play 1 field spell, but in this case he's choosing to play 0 of the White Forest field spell. So okay, that seems reasonable to me. 3 Woes and Morian to make the deck better into Droll. Woes is great in this format in general, so I always want to end on it. One of the things about these types of formats is kind of weird to predict is if you're going into a slower format, cards like Woes of the White Forest can be very, very strong because it guarantees that whatever happens, however you're interacted with, you're going to have a follow-up play. And because the format is slower, you're not worried about not vomiting the strongest possible board possible. So I guess that kind of makes sense. If this is true, if this assumption is true, that it's going to be maybe a slower format or a lower powered format, then Woes of the White Forest is probably a better card. Seriously consider dropping Ilia Sylvia for Chaos Angel, as it has nutty synergy with the Allure cards and in general is strong in a lower powered format. I think that's probably true. I feel like Chaos Angel is one of those cards that can be a weird win condition, like an unexpected win condition in either strange game states in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Or just in a weird format, which is going to be what Genesys is. So Satellite Warrior here, I would also consider the stand-in for Chaos Angel. So I don't know if it's necessary to remove the Ilia Sylvia per se, because we already have the Zapper Shrimp here. So presumably the play is that you have an 8 on field, like your Diabell Queen, and you're going to Zapper Shrimp with her to make the Satellite Warrior, and then you're going to get some pops. But the Chaos Angel can also work in the same way. So yeah, I feel like that might be also another consideration. I don't want to spend too much time on every individual profile, otherwise it may take too long. So here the second one is we have a Lightsworn. So interestingly, they're opting to play some Fiendsmith cards here. Now, you should remember, of course, that there are no links allowed. So this is why there's no cost on the Fiendsmith stuff. So if you were surprised by that, you can't play, like there's no Requiem, you know what I mean? There's no Fiendsmith sequence, there's none of that stuff. You still could do weird stuff. For example, remember This card says you can banish this card from your graveyard, fusion summon a Fiendsmith fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand or field. So you can still use some of the secret effects of the Fiendsmith cards to some effect, I suppose, and I guess that's what he's thinking of. But there's also some synergy with Tract in the sense that you get to discard something. So that's kind of interesting to see. I mean, this one, so adding a Light Fiend monster, I think Weiss was one of the main ones. Where is that card? This one is also a Light Fiend. So this one is a tuner level 4. This is one of the best Lightsworn cards from the recent support. So I guess this is the basic idea, is that you're going to use something like a Tract to search for a Weiss. We see also that there's 3 curse here, which I think is solid. That makes sense to me. I'm assuming, so where's the, so there's Diabell's the White Witch and Diabell Stars. This is not really a White Forest deck. It's more of like, I guess, trying to get access to Diabells, but then why wouldn't you play like 2 of these? 3 curse, I mean, the ratios seem a little strange to me. 3 curse, but only 1 Diabells. I guess there are not so many spells or traps in the deck that he wants to play 3 of, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Seems interesting. I feel like Lightsworn, if this is a deck that doesn't really have point costs anywhere, so we have 10 point costs on the Lightsworn Dragonling, and do we have any point costs anywhere else? We have 33 on Charge of the Light Brigade. Okay. So, I mean, this is a pretty strong card, though. I was going to say, like, if there are no points on any of these, this seems like it could be, you know, a pretty decent contender for mixing with other stuff. So, I'm not sure about this one. Unsure. I feel like I'd have to test that myself. Okay, so now we have one of the wackier ones. We have a Gate Guardian build. Now, probably most of you will not know what some of these cards do, so let me show you the most important card here. So the most important card is this field spell, which is Labyrinth Wall Shadow. So this card says, monsters cannot attack the turn they are summoned except monsters whose original level is 5 or higher. Once per turn during your main phase, you can place one of your Sanga the Thunder, Kazajin, or Sujin that is banished or in your hand or deck face up in your spell and trap zone as a continuous spell. At the start of your opponent's battle phase, you can target one monster your opponent controls with less than 1600 attack, destroy it. So the important thing here is being able to place. So you can place one of the names, and this card is not once per name. So if you were to recycle this, then you would be able to use it twice. So I believe what they said that they're doing is they're trying to summon Gate Guardian of Wind and Water. So if you were to use the field spell to place a Kazajin, and then you were to get rid of the field spell, you know, as like cost for your White Forest card, and then add it back to your hand off of Diabell Queen, you'd be able to use it a second time, and so you would place both your Kazajin and Sujin. So this says that you can special summon it by banishing the above cards you control, so they don't have to be monster cards even, they can be placed in your spell and trap zone, and you just banish them, and then you can summon this. So this is a spell and trap negate, so once per chain when your opponent activates a spell / trap card or effect on the field, quick effect, you can negate that effect. So that's basically what this card does. And that is up to twice per turn, so I guess that's why he's considering this strong. If this face-up special summon card in its owner's control leaves the field because of an opponent's card, you can special summon one of your banished Kazajin or Sujin. So I guess there is like a way to have some recurrence with your engine with this. So it may not feel like super good to remove for your opponent. I would say that in terms of being interesting, this is like a pretty interesting take on how to play the deck. I feel like it's not going to be as consistent as many other builds because, for example, if where's Kazajin himself? So this doesn't really do anything. You know what I mean? So like you have a bunch of engine requirements to make this good. Like here you can see the Kazajin over here. So I feel like this is going to be not super consistent, but it probably will be one of the more fun versions to play because you are in a lower powered format. So on one hand, you can kind of afford to not play a deck that is as crazy as Modern Standard's White Forest. But on the other hand, this is probably not optimized, but it's a very cool idea. So I give this 2 thumbs up. Okay, so moving on to, we have a Centurion build here. Now the unfortunate thing is that both Centurion and White Forest are not costed out of playability, but they are costed out of being, you know, playable in modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, unlike Lunalight, for example. And that means that you have to play very wacky ratios sometimes. Like you can see there's 1 Trudea and there's 1 Primera, 5 and 3. And you may think that 5 and 3 is not actually that much, but trust me, it really does add up when the rest of your engine has very high point costs, or you want to play some non-engine card that has a high point cost. So for example, because the because Os is 100 points, it means that you could play this, but because you would use your entire allowance, you can't actually play Snake Eyes because it costs 5 to play Ash and it costs 5 to play Poplar. So there's lots of these like sneaky little costs that are the difference between a deck being actually pretty good versus not even playable at all. So yeah, I feel like White Forest Centurion sits in a weird space here where there are too many weird costs for you to make like a really good Centurion deck. But I would say in terms of how the engine works here, this is probably like a decent combination of the two engines. You have some additional push because you are playing multiple engines, but the issue with this build is that you can see that there's basically no non-engine. So I would say, when you're going to play cards like Scourge or Sinful Spoils of the White Forest, and you're not playing a single non-engine card, I feel like it will be harder to justify these types of cards. And you could easily argue for taking out cards like these, or maybe a second Tails, maybe like the second Soldier, even though I do like that, the toy cards in the Genesys format. I feel like there's a stronger argument to take those cards out if you have like actually zero non-engine. You could easily be playing, maybe like a Dark Ruler in the main or something like that. So I feel like in terms of engine, this is like pretty cool, seems interesting, but in terms of non-engine, you're just going to get booty blasted when you go, you lose a dice roll, you go second, whatever. Okay, so now we're nearly done, guys. This one is Genesys Toy, and this is kind of cool because this takes me back to the original days of White Forest when you wanted to see Toy Box in every single hand no matter what happened. So this is a bit of a throwback to that, and I also kind of like playing Droll because I feel like this could end up being one of the better non-engine cards to play because the point cost is so low. So it's easier to sneak that in when it's 15 points for an entire playset, and you still have some extra points to use. Now, generally speaking, I don't really like the Amritara play in White Forest where you're trying to get the Manadium reframing. I feel like adding in this card into a deck that already can't be optimized fully in Modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And then is less optimized in Genesys format, I feel like playing these types of cards is asking to brick harder. And if you're going to main deck other things like the Scourge, for example, those add in other cards. Like you have Scourge, you have Morian, you have Woes, you have Reframing. These are all cards that are contributing to your ratios that are not good to draw second. And even if you were going first, you'd still rather search those cards and have that card instead of being some other gas or way to play. So I don't think that that's the best way of playing the deck. But I do think that if you were playing this at like a locals or maybe even like a regionals or something in Genesys format, the engine is probably strong enough that if you win a bunch of your dice rolls, this would be a very strong way of playing the deck. So I'm not going to knock it for that reason. We also see the Fabled Levisable or whatever the guy is called. Or no, it's called Fabled Swarm something. So this guy is pretty cool. So he is a Light Fiend, a level 10 synchro, generic. Once per turn during the main phase quick event, you contribute any number of fabled monsters, and if you do, take control of that many face-up monsters your opponent controls, but their effects are negated. So this card is pretty cool because I was testing this with the Fiendsmith engine because you could make this in White Forest pretty easily, and then you could turn this into Requiem. And there are ways of looping this because this is not once per turn with like Agnum Day or some other Fiendsmith cards. So you could do this up to like 3 times a turn potentially and just like take control of your opponent's monsters. Because you don't have access to Requiem in this format, I feel like it is less strong. And this is really competing even harder than before for the spot with Chaos Angel. And I feel like Chaos Angel is probably a better card, or maybe more worth playing than things like Mechaba, for example. So I would say, was there anything here? So, there's quite a lot of explanation here. So I'm not going to read through the entire thing. So, okay, so interesting reasoning here. So a Stellar may be safer than usual because hand traps are kind of a luxury because they have a point cost. Okay, so that's interesting. That's interesting to think about from a White Forest perspective. Cards like a Stellar may go up in value. The Drolls are a way to stop strong engine decks from getting too much advantage. Okay, one Veiler as a search target. Okay, also super classic White Forest stuff. Playing Scourge is a filler that has strong utility against board breakers. So I guess that maybe board breakers might be, or some board breakers like Dark Ruler could be expected to be strong because of the way that a lot of the normal non-engine cards are costed out. And so maybe if people play more cards like Dark Ruler, then cards like Scourge may be more attractive in White Forest. That's also interesting to read. Foolish Burial Goods is generically useful. That's always going to be the case. Typhoon is a filler against back row. Okay, so then that may be a card to consider playing something else instead of. Let's see, what else? Side is mostly focused on going second. That makes sense. Mechaba is enabled by Muddy, and you can fuse with an Amory on field if you have a Stellar plus box. I don't know if I'm sold on the Mechaba, but I don't know. Maybe I could be persuaded. But I feel like the Muddy Mud Dragon plays are usually not super efficient, especially if you're going into a Mechaba where you still have to discard another card. And White Forest is a deck where if you're going through a longer game or you're in the mid game or whatever, you want to have multiple cards to be able to play properly. So this seems like a pretty interesting take on the deck. I like Foolish Burial Goods. This is one of my favorite cards of all time in White Forest. Only 3 cost. So, you know, playing cards like Foolish Burial Goods and Droll, really low point cards, feel like they could be pretty strong. The Veiler, I don't know, 7 points could be the difference between a slightly different build and not, but I kind of like the 3 Foolish Burial Goods and the 1 Black Gold. I feel like those 10 points there are probably worth it given the fact that you're on 3 Foolish Burial Goods. So I like this overall. Now I've been saving Shien for last because I probably trust him the most in terms of just throwing up a random build I've never seen before and blindly playing it. Shien is one of the OGs on the Discord, by the way, so shout out to Shien. Okay, so let's have a look at this list. This is a toy list, and did he say anything? I sacrificed the Azamina engine to maximize the White Forest aspect of the deck. It is mainly there to OTK. It would be great if there were more outs to Shifter that one could play. So if we take a look here at D-Shifter, it's only 10 points, which I think is crazy. This card should be 1 billion points because I hate it. And I feel like this is one of those cards that you could find something super toxic and cancerous. And because this is only 30 points for a playset, you know, those types of decks may become way better than they should have been. So I don't really like that. But anyhow, this is not a complaining video. I'll leave that to all the other YouTubers to doom and gloom about if Yu-Gi-Oh is over or not this month. So, okay, his main concern is Shifter, but let's ignore that for the moment and let's look at the rest of the deck. So we have the triple Sylvie, triple LZ. We have double Stellar, not 3. We do have 1 Rusia. I kind of like the 1 Rusia because I feel like when you go back to the OG days of White Forest, Rusia was pretty important with the toy cards, partly because you were, you know, pitching something for cost to draw 1 and then getting value off of the tank or the soldier. But I also feel like this could be a decent opportunity to play some good rank 4s. Now, I don't think he mentioned anything about the choices he made for the rank 4s, but this is one of the Magistus cards. Which one is it? Is it this one? I think it might be this one. So I think the main idea here is to do the lock with this guy whose name I forgot, Zeroa the Magistus Conflagrant Calamity. So this one, if this card is synchro summoned, you can equip a Magistus monster from your extra deck to this card. Your opponent cannot activate the effects of monsters with the same card type, Fusion, Synchro, XYZ, or Link, as a Magistus monster card in your spell and trap zone. So the cool thing about this card is this is generic, very, very easy to make in White Forest with almost any hand, even if you're interrupted actually. And so when this guy equips something from your extra deck, it doesn't have to be a link because there are no links, so you don't need to use a link to block them from summoning links. But you could bring out an XYZ, you could bring out another Synchro, for example, or you could even bring out a Fusion. So you basically have like everything covered and you have your opponent under a lock. And so if they don't have an out to this, like if they're not main decking like a Dark Ruler or they have some other way to get rid of this, they may just not be able to play their deck. And I feel like in this type of format, in the Genesys format, where you don't know what other people are playing and they could just lose to a single floodgate when a lot of floodgates are costed out of playability, this seems like an excellent idea. Going back to the Magistus stuff, that seems really, really good. Now, the other one is, I think this is called Starliege something. The Starliege Photon Blast Dragon. So this is the one that Ryziel was playing in the early days. So 2 level 4, so it's generic. If this card is XYZ summoned, you can special summon 1 Photon monster from your hand. While this XYZ summon monster is on the field, your opponent cannot target monsters you control with 2,000 or more attack with card effects. Also, they cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. Right? This is presumably why this card is being played. I don't know. I feel like I'm agnostic on this, whether I think it's good or not. Unless there was some specific reasoning for it. I mean, maybe if you're going into a later game or you had gone through the toy engine and so you just had 2 extra 4s on field, you do want another rank 4 to make. But I'm wondering if there are better options than the Starliege card. I'm not sure. May depend on the specific play. Also, shout out to the Despian Lulu Wallolith, which is one of the sickest looking cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! I feel like. This is one of those cards that I've always tried to find a reason to play because it looks so cool. And the effect is like decent, but it's not broken. There's usually something else that's better than this to play. So this says, once per turn, if a card leaves the extra deck, except during the damage step, you can make all monsters you currently control gain 500 attack permanently. Then you can negate the effects of 1 face-up card on the field until the end of this turn. That's a pretty cool effect. During the end phase, if this card is in the graveyard because it was sent there this turn, you can special summon 1 light spellcaster monster from your hand or deck whose attack equals its own defense. So I think this is like, that attack equals its own defense thing is because of, I don't know if Cartesia was like that. Yeah, because this was like basically like a branded card. So yeah, pretty cool card. I like this. And I think that maybe the Calamity. So this card cost 1, and I think they might have made the Crimson Dragon 100. So technically in the standard format, you can't Crimson Dragon into Calamity, even though Calamity is only 1 point. So that's pretty interesting. I kind of like the Zapper Shrimp. It feels like it offers you some flexibility for the spell trap pop, and then you can go into something else. Let's see, what else here? Because there's no cost on the Mystic Poplar, I feel like that's a decent card to be able to play. It also can help you when you don't have spell or traps as fodder when you're continuing like in the mid game to have other things to send. This seems like a pretty solid list to me. That enables you to do the play with the Snake Eyes Doom Dragon and then go into Execute. Actually, now that I think about it, in Genesys format, I feel like this specific play, like making the Mystic Poplar to then be able to go into the Snake Eyes Doom Dragon and then the Execute Dragon, I think that was already strong, and I already really liked playing that in modern format White Forest, but it's probably even better here just because the power level of other things is generally lower. Anyhow, I haven't really spoken much about the rest of the deck, but I think that the 3 Diabells the White Witch is solid. I love that. I like triple Foolish Burial Goods because it is flexible and you can play 1 goat. 10 is kind of steep, but because you can get access to it off the Foolish Burial Goods, I feel like it's worth it. The point distribution here allows you to play a single field spell because it's searchable and still feel okay. I think there's some argument in some builds to play more than 1 soldier, but in this particular case, if we look at how many non-engine he has, you would be suffering, I think, if you started cutting down non-engine to play more engine. In fact, you could maybe even argue that there should be a little bit more non-engine here over something like a Metal Foes Fusion, which is basically just like a card economy type card. I guess you could also argue the same thing for the second Tails. You could argue that maybe the second Tails and the Metal Foes Fusion should be non-engine cards so that you actually have something closer to like 12 non-engine cards in the deck. 3 Curse of Diabell, I also like that. I feel like this 6 here, Philly Diabell and Curse of Diabell, could be the standard way to play Genesys White Forest. So I really like this, and this is my favorite of all the lists I've seen so far. So if you submitted your deck list, thank you for submitting. If you want to join the Discord, the link will be in the description or in the channel description. And thanks for watching. Also, subscribe if you want to subscribe, or don't if you don't want to.